everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Megan Lear, and I work with the marketing team at UMHS. We're happy to have you join us tonight. November is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and so that's a month where we raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease and show support for the more than 6.2 million Americans that are living with Alzheimer's. We wanted to share a couple of fast facts about Alzheimer's disease. About 1 in 9 people aged 65 and older have Alzheimer's. Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. Older Black Americans are about twice as likely to have Alzheimer's or other dementias as older whites. And older Hispanics are about 1.5 times as likely to have Alzheimer's or other dementia as older whites. As the number of the older Americans grows rapidly, so too will the number of new and existing cases of Alzheimer's. And it's projected that by the year 2050, the number of people aged 65 and older with Alzheimer's will grow to a projected 12.7 million, barring the development of medical breakthroughs that will prevent, slow, or cure Alzheimer's disease. So in recognition of that, tonight we're very proud to welcome to this live stream discussion UMHS fourth year student Nihal Satyadev to talk about some of his research at UMHS, as well as a lot of the volunteer work that he's done with the geriatric population. We're also very pleased to welcome Dr. Craig Eyre, who is UMHS Associate Professor of Molecular Science, to discuss the important role of research in medical school. He's also going to talk about how UMHS students can find research opportunities and how medical students can pursue postgraduate work in research to help find a cure for diseases like Alzheimer's disease. So welcome, Nihal and Craig.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So we're going to start with a couple of introductions. And Craig, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you studied, some of the research projects you've worked on?
Sure, my pleasure. So I am from Newfoundland, Canada, which is an island off the East Coast, relatively rural North American population. And I did my degrees at Memorial University of Newfoundland. So by training, I am an immunologist. So I study how the immune system develops. And as part of my current role from that, it's grown into teaching how the immune system is important for human health and disease. So during my graduate training, while I was going through the university program, my research focus was entirely about how cells in the immune system can communicate with each other. How do they tell what's going on? How do they pass messages? And one of the things that I was heavily involved in a research project that I began is on structures called extracellular vesicles, which are these brand new sort of not really appreciated before idea about these packages, almost like text messages of a really brief message that a cell can send out to tell you what it's doing right now. So after I finished my training at graduate school, I did a postdoctoral fellowship in Moncton, New Brunswick at the Atlantic Cancer Research Institute, where I shifted my focus from immunology to translational medicine and translational diagnostics. And the lab that I was working in was looking at how we can use extracellular vesicles in this broad area called personalized medicine, and in using these sorts of tools for more personalized diagnostics and less invasive diagnostics through a technique called liquid biopsy. And now I am a professor at UMHS. This is actually the second time that I've been affiliated with the university. I did an interim stint as a clinical trial manager for immunological related products or monitoring for ongoing trials that are in North America.
Well, thank you. We're happy to have you back at UMHS and happy to have you joining us tonight. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Nihal, let's turn it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to UMHS, where you did your undergraduate, what you studied, and why you chose UMHS?
Sure, absolutely. So I did my bachelor's in computer science at the University of Redlands in Southern California. It was a little bit before I graduated, that I started the nonprofit, the Youth Movement Against Alzheimer's. And that work motivated me to pursue a master's in public health, which I did at George Washington University, which allowed me to concurrently work on my nonprofit at that time. I ultimately joined University of Medicine and Health Sciences after finishing that degree. I was mostly attracted by the fact that it was a much smaller program and had a better professor to student ratio. And I do feel like we have a amazing relationship with our professors, and it does feel like a family. Currently, I'm concurrently pursuing a master's in computer science at Georgia Tech University.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. And we're definitely going to come back to talking about some of the nonprofit work that you have been doing as it relates to Alzheimer's. So thank you so much for joining us. Craig, let's turn it back over to you. Wanted to just start out with just sort of a big picture view of why research is important to the practice of medicine. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have misconceptions about what research means. And when people hear that, research is important for physicians or the practice of medicine or getting into residencies, there's this idea about what research means, about people in white coats standing around benches with strange liquids doing things that, interest 5 people in the universe. But research is really a way about thinking about questions. Research is learning about how do we approach a problem where we don't have a solution, and sometimes we don't even know really what the problem is, but we know we have to start scratching away at this to figure out what we can do for it. So research is a way of thinking, of approaching problems. And so in the practice of medicine, the way that I think about it is that medicine is the application of what we know. So the best information that we have right now goes through all of these rigors of trials and evaluations to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how do we move forward? How do we help people? Well, the only way to do that is to come up with new and creative and inventive ways of applying what we know, and then discovering something new that we never had before. And so research is our way of asking those questions, evaluating good from bad, of thinking about our world in the sense of, how do I contribute? What do I have? What are my ideas? How can I be creative in this area? So in the practice of medicine, for medical students, for people who are going for residencies, this is really where you get to start thinking about everything that I've ever learned that's theoretical, everything that anybody ever told me in a classroom. How do I start getting my own personalized knowledge on this? How do I make it applicable? How do I bring this to my patients? How do I bring it to my families? When I see the latest craze on social media, how do I tell something that's good, that's not good? How do I communicate that to my patients? That's all research, all of it. And so it's an integral, essential part of the medical experience.
Thank you. I love how you talk about how medicine is the application of what we know. And I think that you addressed a couple of the questions that I had that were related to that, in terms of, that research is not just for people who want to pursue lab work, that it's definitely vital to practitioners and people who want to pursue clinical careers. So thank you for addressing those questions. Nihal, just a question for you. Why do you think med students should pursue research? As a med student yourself, why do you think it's important?
Yeah, I think Dr. Ayer hit on a lot of the important topics on why research is important. I think beyond that, as a med student, we are, at least in our first 2 years, it feels like there's a lot of memorization of a number of different concepts, and the old adage of drinking from a fire hose definitely applies. However, once you get into your clinical rotations and in residency, beyond having memorized the basics, it often comes down to how you apply your understanding of various clinical studies and clinical trials. And I think having a background in research and understanding what goes on along the steps of discovering a drug, implementing a drug, getting it approved through FDA, helps give you critical nuance in understanding these papers as you're reading them. It's not often enough to simply just read the abstract at the top and say, okay, like this is a great drug. No, you have to have an understanding of what sort of populations has this been drug tested on, what sort of extrapolations can be made upon initial read of the paper, and have an understanding that not every trial applies to a medication that's useful for your patient. And so those sort of things are not something that are inherently taught in medical school to an extent to which you probably need to understand to be a good physician. And that's where research can make a big difference.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Craig, you're also chair of the UMHS Research Committee. So I just wanted to ask you, what opportunities are there for students to participate in research?
That's a great question. And so research is going through this renaissance right now, particularly at UMHS, because the reality is the experience of COVID changed the way that we have to operate. And so research in biomedical sciences, particularly when you're somebody like me who's gone through a particular style of training, really does involve more hands-on material. And so during the COVID experience, a lot of our ability to do that shut down. And so you can look at that and say, well, we can't do research anymore. But if you think about research from the idea of what do I know and how do I apply it, then all of these avenues open up for what's now known and called secondary research. So secondary research is when you start looking at things that other people have published, or trials that are ongoing, or data that's already out there, but maybe nobody has asked the question to look at it from a particular perspective. And you've got that idea. So you go out and you look at things that other groups have put out there and you reframe it. And you get the ability to say, hey, I know that this was published 5 years ago under this idea that somebody had, but you know what? It works in this other way. And it works under another field. So all of that area called secondary research, which is where you get literature reviews or meta reviews or systemic reviews or case reports. That is such a wide open area that doesn't depend on specialized equipment. It doesn't depend on having access to any one particular facility space. And so that is wide open for people right now. The other thing that I would suggest, and it's sort of the secondary item that I've been involved in my research career, is big data analysis. So right now, we consider this to be the beginning of the era of personalized medicine. And most publications that come out in the medical field have genetic data or information about genes that we think are important, or entire genome sequences that are publicly available, freely accessible in databases that you can download, you can work with. So all of this material that's been generated from somebody else is accessible and mineable by other people. And so you can build your own primary research from these freely accessible resources. And so getting training and access into doing that is such fertile ground right now that I would encourage, if you have questions like that, now is a great time to be asking them.
That's a great response. And it's sort of just to kind of build on that point a little bit, Craig. So it sounds like if a student is truly passionate about something, that they can find an opportunity to do some research. Can you just talk a little bit about any advice that you would have for a student if they're passionate about researching a particular area, maybe advice for how they could find a mentor or someone to sponsor them?
So that is a great way of viewing this, because I'm gonna piggyback on that and say you can only do research if you're passionate about it. You can only dedicate the time if you truly care. There's nothing worse than starting something and saying a month in, I hate this and I can't do it. And so you pull the plug. So research, taking the time, dedicating yourself to that is an act of passion, and you have to invest yourself in it. So what do? The first advice I give every student is find somebody that you think you can work with, that you click with, that you appreciate either the way they think or the way they mentor. There's something about them that you want to seek out, and I want to learn from you. I think I can work with you. How do you do that? First, peers. Ask people, talk to people, look at LinkedIn, look at what people publish. That's a big one. So somebody who's active in a research community that you want to get involved in, their body of work is out there. You can read everything that they've ever done. You can read it and go, hey, I love that. I think that's a great idea. And you know what? I think I have something to contribute here. Or, Air didn't ask that question. I wish he did. Well, you know what? I wish you'd come work for me and ask it. So getting involved in research is about finding somebody that when you read their work and you ask people and you look through your peer that says, I have something to contribute and I know I have something I can learn with you. And that's it. You reach out. That's how you find the mentorship.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I love how you said that research is an act of passion. That's a great point to make. And it actually leads me perfectly into this next question for Nihal, because Nihal, you founded the Caribbean Research Group. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what advice you have for students who are looking to get connected to research opportunities.
Yeah, the group was actually started on a very similar vein to what Dr. Ayer was mentioning in terms of the fact that it is built by students who do have an active passion for research. What we realized as the founding team was that those of us who were truly interested in research were able to connect not only with opportunities at our campus, but also opportunities with US and Canada-based attendings to do research virtually based on data sets that they're able to provide us or based on guidance that they're able to give us for some of these literature review type works. And so the group essentially recruits new students once a year. We have students apply based on their GPA, any past research opportunities, although that is not required, and mostly speaking to what is their motivation for undergoing research while concurrently in medical school. And then we select students who are high performing and highly dedicated towards these projects, and we help them find projects with attendings at US and Canadian institutions for the purposes, not so much that those research opportunities are radically different from the ones that UMHS provides, but more so because it provides a link for them to connect with someone in a specialty that they're interested in, potentially at a site that has a residency, potentially an attending that can write them a letter of recommendation, potentially working on a more longitudinal project that can speak to their long-term dedication to committing to a large chunk of work. And so that's sort of the idea of the model overall, and students can expect applications to be open around mid-April to mid-May of at least next year, and probably every year going forward from there.
Perfect. And I was wondering too, if you could just talk a little bit about students that could possibly take advantage of a research rotation during their clinical years and the advantages of that.
Absolutely. So this is something I took advantage of. I just did 6 weeks of a research rotation at Mayo Clinic, Florida, studying rapidly progressive dementia. And I'm continuing some of that research longitudinally. As Dr. Ayer will appreciate, and many of those listening will appreciate, it's hard to finish a research project in 6 weeks. But the amazing opportunity that a research rotation provides is if you're able to do some of that baseline work that Dr. Ayer was mentioning in terms of going out there, looking at what sort of things are being published in fields that you're interested, who's publishing those, especially who's publishing those as MDs or DOs. And all you have to do then, if you're truly interested in their work, is email them. Their emails are available on every single paper that they publish, for the most part, if they're a first author or a last author, and say, hey, I read your last 2 papers, your last 3 papers, was really fascinated by the work you do. Would you be open to hosting me for a research rotation? oftentimes for them, that's zero cost. And it allows you the opportunity to work with this person, this attending in person, and really get a deeper understanding for some of the technical things that go on when you're doing a full-time research project for 6 weeks. So I think it's a great opportunity and something that students should try to pursue, especially given that so many specialties do look at research as something quite positive when you are applying for the match.
Perfect. Thank you for that insight. Just want to pause for a moment. I should have mentioned at the top of the discussion that we are welcoming the questions from the audience. So if anyone is tuning in that has questions for either Craig or Nihal, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and taking a pause to respond to any of your questions. So if you have questions about research or research opportunities at UMHS, or as we start to dig a little bit deeper into Alzheimer's and the work that Nihal has done, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat. We will pause and answer those as they come in. So just to go back to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, can I add one thing in with what Nihal just said? He hit something that was super important, and I'd like to say the same thing. When you reach out to somebody that you want to work with because you've read their materials and you think they're interesting and you want to get in touch, his advice of saying, hey, I read your paper, I read your last 3 paper, I found this interesting. Be specific when you reach out, because people get a lot of emails and it's very easy to just disregard them. You don't know what's good, what's bad, and who's just fishing, right? You want to make yourself stand out. Tell them why you're contacting them. I liked your paper. I think this is really interesting. I love what you're doing. I thought this hypothesis was good. This data is really compelling. I want to come work with you because, and it's not just I want to come work with you. I want you to tell me why you picked me. And then I know if we're going to click, right? So be specific, reach out in that way. That's fantastic advice.
Perfect. Thank you for adding that. I think that is really helpful for everybody that's tuning in. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Nihal, you have done a lot of work with the elderly population, both as a volunteer and as a student and researcher. So I was wondering if you could just start off a little bit by talking about the work that you've done with the youth movement against Alzheimer's, and also talk about CareCore.
Sure, absolutely. So the organization started in 2015 when myself and a few of my friends had a realization that that the trajectory around this disease is quite catastrophic economically. It is the biggest threat to our economy from a healthcare perspective that we don't have a clear solution for in the upcoming decade or two. And so when we went back and, we were like, oh yeah, this is really bad. Everyone's probably working on it. We also found that in the top 150 colleges in the US, there were 4 active groups working on aging or dementia. And so we set out to essentially create the equivalent for colleges against cancer, but for dementia. And then beyond that, we also created a what's known as respite care or effort, where we train undergraduate students on how to provide short-term care for individuals who are living with early to mid-stage dementia. We partner them one-on-one, and that gives their family member who's otherwise providing 24 hours of care to get a break. And that has been shown in the literature and in some of the work that we've published to significantly decrease rates of stress and depression in caregivers. One of the shocking stats around Alzheimer's is not only the fact of 6.2 million people have the disease, but because there are over 16 million caregivers for these people, and 40% of these caregivers are diagnosed with depression. More people get depression because of Alzheimer's than there are people with Alzheimer's. And so it is a very challenging job to provide care, and it does take an overall societal approach to address how we tackle this challenge of caregiving for Alzheimer's and other chronic conditions. So as we saw that there was a lot of students that were interested in this respite care work, and we saw that every semester that we provided this opportunity, all of the slots were filled, we decided to start looking at what are some of these opportunities to integrate this into policy and into legislation. And that's where we came across an opportunity to model this as like an AmeriCorps for caregiving. So some of you may be familiar with like Teach for America models or Peace Corps. The idea essentially being once you graduate high school or undergrad, that you would get further, that you would be stipended for at a full-time rate for 2 years and provided educational stipends for further education once you're done with that. And during those 2 years, or 1 to 2 years actually, you would be providing some sort of service that is much needed to society. And we structured this for caregiving. So we were able to introduce 2 bills into California legislation. Ultimately, these have not yet passed, but this has been integrated into what's now known as the Master Plan for Aging in California. And it's a priority that we expect California to take on as it looks to transform its aging-related infrastructure. And ultimately, our goal in the long term with our Care Corps, which is a 501c4 branch of our nonprofit, is to integrate this into national policy. So it is policy is not always quick and easy, but it is lasting. And so we do anticipate that there are hurdles ahead of us, but we do feel strongly about the potential for this model.
That's pretty incredible and definitely inspiring. I'm sure a lot of people who are tuning in know someone or love someone who has been touched by Alzheimer's disease. And you're absolutely right that the stress and the pressure on caregivers is immense. So the work that you're doing to help to kind of support those caregivers in addition to helping Alzheimer's patients is pretty significant. Was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the research that you did at UMHS that led to you winning an NIH grant. Just talk a little bit about that.
So when I was on UMHS campus pre-pandemic, was a different world, but nonetheless, UMHS did have a number of active projects for us to get involved in. And initially, I got involved in a project in the anatomy lab. We published some case reports there and worked with a couple other professors as well, including Dr. Alonso, on some population-based solutions for St. Kitts healthcare. And this initial work essentially gave me enough sort of research background or research cred, so to speak, to seek an opportunity to do an NIH funded summer research internship. And so I applied for the grant and I was able to be, I was humbly was able to get it, and allowed me to do work for a summer at UC San Diego studying gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us what the current status is of that research?
So it's actually, the timing of this talk is incredible because right now it's 5:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific. And at this exact moment, my postdoc is giving our first public announcement of our findings that he's been working on this project for the last 5 years. And so I can speak in broad strokes without giving too much of the specifics, but the idea behind the therapeutic is essentially to modify the C terminus of the amyloid precursor protein, which is a terminus that contains a specific domain that tracks the amyloid precursor protein into endosomes. And when they're in endosomes, it's been shown that they interact with beta secretase, which causes amyloid precursor protein to form amyloid beta plaques. And this is what the amyloid hypothesis says is the likely cause of Alzheimer's disease. And so through this genetic modification, they are looking to, they've implemented a CRISPR-based tool, which goes in and modifies, it cuts out this region essentially, and allows amyloid precursor protein, rather than going into the amyloid beta pathway, to go into the amyloid alpha pathway, which has actually been shown to be neuroprotective. And so there is strong mouse work that supports these results, and the group is going to be working in future years to replicate the work that they've done in mice into monkeys. And if that continues to maintain, then clinical trials would be the next step. But it is promising. But with all things Alzheimer's, we need to have strong hope, but yet maintain patience as we go from animal models to clinical trials.
Perfect. And could you also just share with us a little bit about, just based on your volunteer work and the research that you've done, what other knowledge would you like to share with people who are tuning into this discussion about Alzheimer's disease? What are maybe some misconceptions or things that you think people just don't know that they need to know?
Yeah, I think there's many things. It is a very diverse disease and affects many families differently. But I think the thing to start with is simply, what is dementia? And I think it's not always clear what the difference is between dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And what dementia simply means is the inability to do activities of daily living due to the fact that you have memory impairment. And these activities of daily living, or independent activities of daily living, are essentially tasks that we perform as young adults or adults without chronic conditions quite easily, such as bathing, or eating or cooking, or more independent tasks like finances. And those are things that people with dementia have a challenge doing. Now, the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and that accounts for about 60% of cases of dementia. But there are other things that cause dementia that cause people to present very similarly to Alzheimer's disease, but they're pathophysiologically quite different. And those include things like vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, late stages of Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease in certain cases. And so we sort of need to make that separation. Now, the other thing that's very important to understand about Alzheimer's disease is that it can be prevented at a societal level. There are key factors that have been published, republished, and republished again that have shown in multiple studies in large population pools that are important things that we can be doing on a daily basis to reduce our risk for Alzheimer's disease. Now, there are a small number of people that have a genetic cause of Alzheimer's disease, which is about 5% of individuals, and that those family trees are not modifiable by risk factors. But for 95% of us that maintain a risk for developing sporadic Alzheimer's disease, there's 4 key things that we can be doing every day to make sure that we are reducing our risk for this disease. And these are going to be listed essentially in the order of magnitude in which they make a difference in preventing Alzheimer's disease. The first thing is reducing vascular risk factors. So that is if you have high blood pressure, if you have high cholesterol, anything that would increase your chance for having something like a heart attack or a stroke, those sort of things, it's quite important to get those managed and get those into more normal ranges. The second thing would be exercise. Exercising at a moderate intensity for about 150 minutes per week has been shown to significantly reduce risk for dementia. Beyond that, diet is very critical. The best diet for brain health is the Mediterranean diet, which consists of healthy fats, healthy proteins, and maintains a good balance of what we call macros, or essentially your carbohydrates, proteins, and fat ratio. And that's something I won't get into the details, but can be easily looked up. The Mediterranean, or the MIND diet, is what that would be referring to. And the last thing is to improve your quality and quantity of sleep. This is something I cannot say I am a model person for, nor are most med students, but if you can, you would want to make sure you get enough REM cycles. But there are a couple of things that you can do to improve your quality of sleep. These are things that I do myself, which is reducing blue light during your final hour or two before you get into bed, getting more sunlight during the early hours, and also setting a bedtime routine so that your body inherently is ready to go into your stages of sleep more quickly. So those 4 things I think are critical. Again, vascular risk factors, exercise, diet, and sleep And those can, at a societal scale, really reduce our risk for Alzheimer's disease and the burden it poses to families across the country.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I have one more question for you, and then we have a question in the chat. But my question to you, Nihal, before we wrap up, just based on your volunteerism and your advocacy that you've done on behalf of this population, how is, for the people who are tuning in who are, current prospective healthcare providers, maybe caregivers, how is the patient experience different for patients with dementia? And why is continuity of care important? Just want to make sure we give you an opportunity to address those questions.
So I think that speaks to a little bit around our medical education system. I think one of the things that is very challenging to integrate in any medical education changes is there's so many things to already know in medical school. So it's hard to fit extra things. But one thing that I think medical education does miss is we don't really get an understanding of where we're discharging patients to. We don't ever go visit assisted living facilities or nursing homes. What is a subacute rehab? And these are places where large swaths of our population, and especially the geriatric population, resides. And so I think it's very important to have an understanding of what their sort of day-to-day is like and what sort of supplementary medicine adjunct sort of services are provided at each of these sort of facilities. Now, the patient experience for persons with dementia, I think, is sort of it speaks for itself in terms of what the patient experience, how the patient experience would be different. I think if you are coming into a new setting, you don't really have an understanding of why you're in this setting. You don't know that it's a hospital, or you may have an understanding that it's a hospital, but you might not remember why you're there. Well, of course, it's going to be a different interaction with healthcare providers, and healthcare providers have to be understanding of the fact that they may need to repeat at times why they're providing the treatments that they're providing. They may have to use distraction techniques. They may have to make sure that the sort of patient education that they're providing is both directly to the patient, because the patient is still can oftentimes still be very much with it, even when they have dementia, but making sure that the caregiver is also informed, even if the caregiver is not in the room. And so taking that extra time to make sure that family members are apprised of what sort of interventions have been done in the inpatient or outpatient setting is very critical to maintaining the opportunities for patients to have a quality of care beyond their direct interaction with the physician.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And so now I'm going to go to the question that we just got into the chat, and that is, have either of you heard of neurofeedback as a treatment in regards to Alzheimer's or dementia? And so I don't know if one of you are available to address that.
I can try. I haven't. I think the overall concept of neurofeedback or biofeedback is quite an interesting one. And I think it has been shown in certain opportunities to address conditions like autonomic insufficiency and resistant hypertension. But I have not seen anything of clinical significance that you can use these sort of techniques to prevent or stop Alzheimer's disease. But if those in the chat want to link to papers, I'm always willing to read more.
Dr. Eyre, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, nothing from me on that one. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So Craig, Nihal is a great example of a student who has really connected the dots between his passion, obviously, for, treating patients with dementia and our aging population, and has found these great research opportunities. I was wondering if you could talk about, some of the emerging trends in research that you think are exciting that you can talk about just in kind of broad terms.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's, I'm going to say the modern focus that we have in medical research and biomedical research is what's called personalized medicine. It's important enough that the World Health Organization is kind of recognizing that the 2020s are supposed to usher in the era of personalized medicine. So what is that? So personalized medicine is the idea that we're going to move away from the idea of treating people as a population, like you are a group who have cancer, or you are a group who have a particular disease. And we have all of these statistical models. It's an entire field of science called epidemiology that says, if you present this way, I do this thing first, then I do this, then I do this, because that's probably the best chance that we have for treating your illness. And we have enormous volumes. They're called treatment protocols, or the gold standard protocol for what we're going to do is an individual who presents this way, you do A, B, C, D, E. Personalized medicine is the idea that you are an individual. You come in from your own environment. You have your own genetic contribution. You have your own nutritional contributions. You have your own version of a disease. And maybe it's similar to someone else's, maybe it's not. But the way that I have to treat you, the way that you need to be treated, has to be customized to the specific version of the disease that you have. And so once upon a time, if you want to think about it in the broadest strokes, if you go back to like the 1950s and you say, somebody has leukemia. Okay, well, first, you've probably just told that person that they're going to die. But second of all, you've given them one word for what's wrong with them. If you go to the 1970s, now leukemias start to get subdivided. And then if you go into the 1980s, we decide, hey, actually, we should treat these patients differently. They're not the same disease at all. And if you get to this point, we could say, if you have this leukemia, there's a 95% chance that I can cure you. But if you have this other leukemia, there's about a 15% chance that we can cure you. Same thing happened with breast cancer. But now what we're saying is that if I know why you are individually sick, the genes that you have that are mutated, or the specific markers that you have, then I can choose a different protocol for you than anyone else. And so personalized medicine is the era of medicine that we're moving into, and it's going to shape so much of what we do from here on out. And it's all based around being able to treat you as an individual person. And what does it depend on? Really good computers and being able to get specific gene level information about your diseases that are matched up against environmental information that we can get from you and dietary information that we can get from you. And then we recommend a treatment plan for you. So that leads to an entire new era called companion diagnostics. So the biggest roadblock, most of us have probably heard of something called the Human Genome Project, which published the first draft of the human genome in 2001 and cost us $3 billion, took us 15 years, and then we all went, great, what do I do with it? I have no idea. Because we didn't know what to do with that level of information. So now we're in this era called companion diagnostics, where we say, hey, if I find you have this mutation, we now know enough that I can first look for it. And then second, there's a drug that actually matches that. Great example, we're doing it with lung cancer right now. We've discovered that there's an entire branch of lung cancers under a category called non-small cell lung cancer that overexpress one gene that is used for controlling if a cell should grow or not. And so these people have too many copies of it. And we can find that now, test for it, and say, okay, you get a particular drug because it shuts that off. And we won't give that to anybody else because they don't have that. So that's the era of companion diagnostics. The last big one that I guess I'll highlight is something that Nihal just said on gene therapy. So to do gene therapy, you had to know first what a gene was and then which ones you got and how to work with it. So like I said, the Human Genome Project took about 15 years and $3 billion. You can order on Amazon Prime Day, go on and look, you can order a gene sequencing kit for yourself for probably $99 and get the same level of information that took us $3 billion less than 20 years ago. And so now we have the capability of saying this broad amount of information on such a large group of individuals that we're getting all of this data that we can start looking at creating specific personalized therapies for them. Now we need a way to edit genes. And this is still a little scary place for a lot of people because your genes are who you are. They're the instruction code for you. So if I change them, I'm really fundamentally altering the makeup of you as a person. And so, there's been sci-fi movies for generations about this as an idea, but we're starting to work with this. So for example, in September, the first clinical gene therapy trial launched for HIV. And so HIV as a virus integrates itself into your genome. It becomes part of you at the gene level. And so there's a clinical trial right now aimed at to cut it back out. Enrolled its first patient, started in September. Alzheimer's now has its first gene clinical trial that appears when I was looking at the dates for October 15th, which is looking at trying to provide a growth stimulating factor to keep neurons alive when otherwise they may die off. So these diseases that we used to consider intractable, there's nothing we can do for you. Gene therapy is giving us a whole brand new tool for being able to try to tackle these. So looking at the latest publication that I have right now, there's at least 69 gene therapy products that are awaiting approval by the FDA. And we're looking at a couple of hundred trials that are beginning over the next few years, primarily in cancers right now. About 66% of them are being given for cancers. But then about 25% of them are for genetic disorders, metabolism disorders primarily, that previous generation would have said, your life expectancy is 5 years, 10 years. And that can't be a normal life because it's such a profound level of dysfunction. And we're looking at ways of saying, you no longer have congenital deafness, or you no longer have this metabolic disease. And so gene therapy is changing the entirety of what we think we can do with medicine.
It's pretty exciting to see these research, just strides in research and opportunities to find cures and treatments for these diseases, as you said, that have been intractable to date. So very exciting.
The coolest part now, I think the coolest part now is we're such victims of our own success that we get negative, we get discouraged about our own successes. If you go back 100 years, the things that we couldn't deal with were things now that are trivial. So for example, somebody who gets a bacterial infection 100 years ago dies. And now, when was the last time you even think about that? Or you think about, I'm an immunologist, you think about vaccination and the things that now we don't even see anymore as human beings. So the problems that we're tackling now in medicine are diseases that 2 and 3 generations ago, we didn't even know existed because something else got us first. We're so successful that we're tackling diseases that we had to get really good at. And so now we're getting even better.
It is pretty inspiring, pretty awe-inspiring. So just sort of bringing it back to UMHS and the work that you do with students there, what are your plans for the future of research at UMHS? What do you see on the horizon?
What I would like to get involved in here with UMHS is an area of research called biomedical sciences, and that is my major background. So biomedical sciences is one of those fundamental disciplines that looks at how does human health occur? Like at a fundamental level, what is it that regulates how our bodies operate? And then how do we use that to make better medical decisions? So my background in how cells talk to each other, the thing that we discovered is that cells put out all these messages into the blood that we didn't even know were there before. And so we're all very used to an idea of a biopsy. We've all heard of a biopsy before where somebody has to go in. Well, what does that mean? We're going to cut a little chunk out of something, and then we're going to see what it is and what's wrong with it and decide if you're sick or not. Well, what if we could do that without having to cut something? What if we could do that with just a blood draw? What if we could do that from saliva? And so what I work in is being able to create tools for saying, what is in your blood? What messages have your cells put out? And can I use that to figure out if you're healthy, if you're sick, or maybe you're healthy now, but you're on a path where your cells are sending out these SOS messages and you're not sick yet, but we know it's coming. So we can get ahead of it. Preventative medicine. So that's my background. And those are the kinds of things that I want to bring more into UMHS. Some of it may be looking at data that's already existing in literature and being able to ask new questions with it. And some is to be able to start working with samples here on the island. But it's a whole new area of research for us to go into. So it becomes this wide open field of trying to shape the kinds of questions we can ask.
Perfect. Thank you for that. At this point, I just wanted to offer, once again, if anybody that's tuning in has any questions, if you'd like to drop those into the chat, we'd be happy to ask your questions of Craig and Nihal. And as we wait for anybody that might have questions, we just also wanted to share, just in light of Alzheimer's Awareness Month, we did want to share some additional resources for people who might be interested in getting more information specifically about Alzheimer's. I believe that we are going to be dropping those resources into the chat or the comments section, depending on what platform you are on while you're tuning in tonight. The first is a link to the Alzheimer's Foundation. There's a direct link to Alzheimer's Awareness Month, what it is, what it means. So there are a lot of great resources on that website. The second website is for the Youth Movement. That is the organization that Nihal was very involved in and founded in college that he described earlier. And then the third website is the Caribbean Research Group, which Nihal also described earlier in our discussion tonight. So we wanted to make sure that we shared those resources with everybody who's tuning in tonight. If you would like to look into those websites for additional information. We haven't gotten any additional questions in the chat, so I also wanted to just let anybody know that's tuning in that if you have follow-up questions or if you'd like to reach out to Dr. Ayer to talk about his work in immunology, the research that he's done, research opportunities through UMHS, he has graciously offered to share his email address if you'd like to contact him directly. That should also be getting dropped into the comments or the chat, depending on whatever platform you're using to tune in tonight. And Nihal as well has shared his email address, so you are welcome to reach out and contact him with any further questions. Any other questions from the audience tonight before we wrap up? It doesn't look like we have any. Oh, we might have one other. Okay. It looks like there are no further questions. So at this point, I just wanted to let everybody know that this discussion is being recorded. It will be posted to the UMHS YouTube page. We have all of our past live stream events also posted to that page. It's a terrific resource. You can go back and watch the recordings of recent live streams, including What is a Hospitalist? Just an excellent resource with all of the past events that UMHS has hosted. So we would encourage you to go to that page to poke around, learn a little bit more. But just wanted to thank both Craig and Nihal for taking the time. I know you're both very busy, and we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us tonight, share your expertise, share your insights. So thank you so much for both of you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure being here.
Of course. Well, thank you both. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. And